evening, everyone, and welcome to the Alex Thomas Show. So excited to have you here, and genuinely excited, exuberant, thrilled to have Joshua K.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I'm excited I said all those great adjectives about Joshua because when I met him, I could tell he was a smart guy and he cared about this community. And that's the kind of person that I want on the show. So I'm going to let Joshua tell you about himself. Joshua.
All right. Well, so I teach at the University of Michigan Law School in the legal clinics that we have there. And legal clinics are like small pro bono law firms. And students can enroll with the clinics for credit. And they get to do real cases for people who really need those cases done for free while learning from the faculty. And the faculty supervise their casework. And so I teach mainly in what's called the Child Advocacy Law Clinic, which deals mostly with child protection cases, child abuse and neglect cases. But I've done a variety of family law and civil litigation in various clinics there.
All right. Are you from this area? And we're going to jump right into the child issue in a second, but I want to get a bit of the personal background.
I'm not originally from this area. I've lived in Washtenaw County for 25 years now, a little over 25 years. I actually grew up in the city of Los Angeles.
Oh, L.A.
Yeah, L.A.
I didn't get West Coast from you.
A lot of people say that.
Really?
I'm not sure what it means, but yeah, a lot of people do say that.
You have like a Midwestern feel. I guess it was a compliment. And it's not to say anything negative about West Coast.
Sure. My parents are both from Chicago originally, so maybe that's why.
Okay.
They all fit together now. That's good.
So did you come here to go to U of M, or you had people?
Yeah, well, I went out. I went to college at Oberlin College in Ohio first, and then I came to graduate school in psychology here at U of M. So I have a PhD in clinical psychology. Mm-hmm. And I stayed after that and worked mainly at Mott Children's Hospital, working with kids and families there as a psychologist, and then went back to school to get my law degree, also at the U of M.
Well, that's so much to dive into, but I caught Oberlin, and a lot of people don't. Rich tradition, liberal arts.
Liberal arts, very progressive college, small college.
A quick prompt. Why is this jumping out? I'm trying to think of some famous alum or something distinctive about. I know the history of progressivism, progressiveness, but it's in various. I think Rod Sterling went there, but that's not
that I didn't. If that's true, I did not know.
But I'm missing so much. Give a shot, something like probably a little known fact or something, because it really does have a distinctive identity that I should have done my research on before.
Well, it's got a conservatory and a college put together, so that's kind of nice. Lots of music going on campus. It's got a really rich tradition of co-education. It admitted women from very early on, and also admitted African American students from very early in its history, which at the time was really unusual, to be honest. Let's see. There's a lot of history.
Check it out. Oberlin College.
You can look it up. It's
he found it from LA.
Oberlin.edu. I managed to find it before it was on the web. So,
but you came here, and so law degree, and then you studied was it clinical psychology that you did?
Yeah, clinical psychology first, and then the law degree. Yeah, that's right.
Well, clinical psychology first, then law degree. Did you practice in clinical psychology? Right after you received that?
Yeah, for several years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that just private practice or teaching, or?
I did a little bit of private practice for a couple of years, but most of my time was spent on the faculty of U of M Medical School, and I was part of the. I was one of the clinicians working at Mott Children's Hospital.
Okay.
So I worked on the medical units at Mott, working mostly with kids with disabilities and with their families.
Okay. And just for the audience, so we're going to stay on that for a minute, because that was many times when people ask me, like, what's the number one issue here in Washtenaw County for you? I will say the way that our children are growing up. the lack of, and I'm pausing because I immediately think like the lack of after school programming, but it's not just after school programming. I think it's creating a healthy environment for kids to recognize their best potential and treating them in that way, and not like walking issues or a problem, but creating healthy environments and a space for them to grow in. I think there's a lack of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a real, there are differences all across the county in terms of the opportunities that people have, including kids, differences in educational opportunity, and in job opportunities and all sorts of things, housing issues. So there are a lot of, Washtenaw County has a lot of disparities across its population. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I say that's because working in with the health department and just in the different circles that I've been in, I do see a big recognition in that community of those disparities, but and because they're so complex and so many different factors involved, but there's not a lot of clear solutions or solutions that are enacted, I don't think. But that's what I'm so glad to have.
I think it's a complicated set of issues, and so there's not going to be one solution that's going to, magic wand fix this. I think it takes a community response across areas and a real desire to invest in services and in the people. But I think it's partly that the state of Michigan really struggles to do that in a way that, so that I think revenue sharing with the local communities is really a problem in this state, that there's not nearly enough of that. And so I think local communities are left to really fend for themselves, yet kind of hamstrung in doing that by various, structural features of Michigan. So it's a big, complicated problem, but it's also one that we have to tackle. It's absolutely imperative that we ensure equal opportunity.
To the point that it being a big complicated one, like many things in America, it's not always about money, but
it's about money.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a combination of things, but money's big. Yeah.
And you may have answered this already, as far as if you could place, a real infusion of capital in one particular area. Would that be at the local level, if somehow that local government, local municipalities having more control?
It's hard to narrow it to one area. I really think of two. Education, the schools. I think we really starve our schools in the state of Michigan, and I think it's crazy. It shows a real lack of investment in the future and devastatingly short-term thinking. The other area that we really need is good, accessible mental health care. That's just been gutted over the last few decades in this state, and that creates a lot of ripple effects. So I think those are two areas where I think strong investment there would lead to really great dividends for all our communities.
We're on school choice. From working in the community the last 3 years, I think the ramifications of that are the ramifications of that are at the root of so many issues. And I qualify myself. I say the ramifications of that because I was always, at first I was unsure. Then I was totally, I fought the whole idea of school choice. Unsure because I didn't know what to tell a parent that their only option was a horrible school near them. And this is an opportunity to get their kid into a better situation. So how can you say no to that? So that's why I was pausing. But then after coming, and that was looking at it from a theoretical academic point of view. But then when I come into the community and see and visit the schools and going from from what I had to draw on when I grew up in this area, some of our schools are just, there's not a real learning opportunity for some of the kids, for a lot of the kids. It's not a learning environment for a lot of the kids, and and then the numbers are showing it, and in terms of reading level, graduation rates, efficient proficiency scoring.
Right.
It's just the schools they're failing. They're, the animal world. They do a great job of preparing their youth for the environment they're going to be in when they mature, and we do a horrible job in our education system. I think we don't prepare adults, we don't prepare children for that adult world they're going to be in. But having said all that, that's the reason I don't like school choice is because it takes money out of public education and it takes it out of the most vulnerable districts, gives it to the wealthier, and it makes poor performing schools in a worse situation.
Right. So a school of choice feels to me like a convenient sounding pseudo solution to a real set of problems. And so it's like slapping a Band-Aid on a cut, but the reality is your leg's broken, right?
Yes.
So you need to, and I think the better solution would be to invest in schools and really value equity there, so that instead of saying, well, essentially school of choice is like saying, it's almost okay that we have schools that are really, really struggling because we'll give you just a ticket out of there. But the only people who can actually use that ticket are people who can get to the other schools, right?
Absolutely.
So it's a really problematic solution. It makes the struggling schools struggle even more or ends up with them shutting down. It costs neighborhoods, in essence, because having neighborhood schools is part of neighborhood cohesion, community cohesion. So you break that up, and you're draining resources, you're really just shifting resources. When the real solution would be to create good education across the board through strong investment. That's the real solution, but we're not willing to do that, it seems. So instead we say, well, you can just leave that school. And I just think that that's, again, an example of that short-term thinking that doesn't get you where you need to go on a community-wide level.
I definitely agree. I'm curious how on the past maintenance millage, and excuse me for my wording on it, but the millage that just recently passed for Ann Arbor Public Schools.
In Ann Arbor?
I believe it was titled Facilities, or do you remember exactly what the title?
It's to do massive facilities upgrades.
For Ann Arbor Public Schools.
For Ann Arbor Public, that's right.
And my inclination is any millage, I'm in favor, just more money to the schools. I was surprised that some people that I respect that they were against it, and it was on the argument that if they pass that millage within Ann Arbor Public Schools, then they're going to make it less likely to do funding county-wide, which what needs to be done later down the road. And that was their argument. And I wasn't in Ann Arbor, so I didn't have to make a real decision, but I thought that was interesting. It was about a week before the vote that I had. But I'm wondering, just those lines of thinking, did you have that line of thinking? Did you have an opinion on that millage, or why?
My opinion is that the need for the millage points to the problem. And regardless of what I think about the millage itself, Michigan is one of very few. Right, it passed.
The past millage, what we're speaking. We're not talking about a future idea.
The past millage. That's right. But I think the need for that, as I said, was an example of the problem, or showed the problem, which is in part. So the state of Michigan is one of the few states where you don't get to use state money on facilities upgrades, apparently. So it really sticks the districts. In the meantime, districts can't use millages, again, by state law, to do things like fund their teachers better, right? So it just creates this mess in terms of school funding that is structural, and I think it's by design. I think it creates deep inequities. And I just can't help but think that when that was being worked on at the state level some time ago, I can't believe that they didn't know that it would create huge problems and that it would benefit only certain constituencies. And so I think I think that the millage, again, regardless of what I thought about the millage itself, I think that it shows that there's a problem. The fact that Ann Arbor felt compelled to even do a millage at that point, and one of that size suggests that things are deeply wrong.
In the civic, nonprofit, educational circles that concern community that are in those different communities, there's a recognition of that. But I don't know if does it translate into political power and political will, or does it transfer? That recognition doesn't transfer into policy change as quick as I like.
As quick as anybody would like.
But recognition is the first part, but are we on the road there, do you think? Are we even on the right path?
No.
Are we having the right? Okay.
I don't think we are.
Was quick. That's why.
I hate to be that, that quick to be that negative.
I love it.
But I think that it takes, the state created this problem through the way it transformed education funding. And I don't claim to be an expert on education funding. You can get someone from one of the schools of ed to talk about that, or a public policy school to talk about that. What I do know is that Michigan is not investing on the state level in its schools nearly enough. And that is sort of the most obvious major first step in really helping young people is to invest. And so I think it's a structural problem at the state level, and so it requires political will at the state level, and that's why I answered very quickly no, because I don't think our legislature is interested at this time in fixing this problem.
And to be fair, you're a child advocate and I consider an expert in child advocacy in this area and a very well-credentialed person.
Thanks.
But so education policy, I'm sure you're familiar, but that's not why I asked you.
Right, that's not my central area,
But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm thinking, as you were giving my answer, your answer, I was thinking about the Headley Amendment and the linking of property taxes, the limiting of the amount of increase in a tax, and how those local property taxes are how the school budget is set, but that money goes to the state, goes through a little, then it's sent back.
Right.
So that state policy, which you focused on, is that Headley Amendment part of it?
Part of it. And the old Proposal A, I believe it was, that dealt with school funding structures some time ago. So, again, not an area of expertise, but what I can do is look at kids I work with, look at our county, look across the state, and look at the figures that are coming out of the schools and say, wow, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that while money isn't everything, it's an important thing.
It just gets bigger and bigger.
Yes, it does.
Before I went on air, I was explaining to Joshua that I first of all always think about my immediate community, West Willow, that neighborhood, and then that as the largest one in Ypsilanti Township, and not having any type of specific representatives for West Willow, we have at-large trustees. Then it's about Ypsilanti Township government, and then having issues and trying to think, and then that brings you to the county, and so when people have asked me about the presidential election, other things, I say, I'm focused locally, right here. It's what's going on right here. But in that process, and especially this, I've been getting more of an appreciation for the state outlook and such, and you're just reconfirming that. It's like, man, I'm not in Lansing, and it's hard to be in those discussions.
Right. I think the local units of government are really up against it, that they are operating with too few resources, and that a big part of that is because of how the state has structured how those communities can get resources, can get state dollars, what's the revenue sharing look like. And so we're asking them to do a great deal with very little. And I don't think that's a recipe for success. I think that they're working on, and this is not to blame those local government units at all. I've talked to a lot of officials. They take their jobs super seriously. They work very hard. They're trying to do the right thing. And we're basically saying, get in a big fight, and we're going to tie one arm behind your back, and we're going to tie one leg up so you're hopping, and we're going to put a blindfold on you.
Yeah.
It's just, you're not going to win that way.
And we're not going to tell anybody or put any information about it, just little tidbits. And I'm saying that local media vacuum. Like, I mean, people don't even know they live in Ypsilanti Township. There's not, or where exactly or who they're represented. I mean, you can, and we live in a fairly open democracy. You can say fairly. You can find out. You can speak to your representative. The information's there. So
Right.
just,
but it's not like
in
getting a
defense of those
daily
local-
newspaper
right
anymore.
It was just an added burden
Yeah.
because what local officials are up against and how difficult it is. I mean,
So I think it's it actually, in this, it's sort of paradoxical, right? We're in this amazing information age, and yet in certain ways it's harder to reach,
absolutely.
for public officials to really reach their constituents, I think, because, in part because it's not the case that everybody's getting the daily paper anymore, right?
Right.
Sitting and looking at it. So there are a lot of factors going on. We've identified a lot of complicated problems already.
Yeah, but too simple, I think, for people to think that with school choice and the breakdown in community, and when you think of, I say in my neighborhood all the time that now 8 kids the same age could go to 8 different schools, literally.
Right.
When I was a child, you would have all been in the same classroom. And if you had parents like my mom that didn't talk to anybody except the parents of the kids her kids went to school with, you have people not talking to each other, not having that sense of community, that breakdown in community.
Right.
And so that school choice, and then the lack of local media where people don't, I mean, we have, like you said, it's paradoxical. We have all this information, but people are less informed.
Right.
And I think a big part of that, another thing with that loss of local media, there's no central narrative for people to see themselves in. I grew up.
That would unify.
Yeah, we had an Ypsilanti Press, and there I can just imagine all the headlines each week that people would be talking about, as opposed to their individual circle and social media and things, and and it's I'm thinking of there was a recent Sunday where 3 of the top 5 stories on M Live were about Michigan football. And it was a Sunday, and I'm an age growing up with the Sunday paper. It used to be like a phone book.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Information,
I love getting the Sunday paper.
Yeah, and I just thought wow, 3 of the 5 stories on a Sunday, and all that what used to be in there and all that. So I think that loss of local media, school choice, those are two big issues that I think that really affect the condition of children, and just the amount of attention and interest and understanding people have about all these important issues that we're trying to do something about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I was gonna, unless you had some thoughts, I was gonna try to segue into mental health.
Yeah.
And then we might go back to kids too, because they all are connected.
It's all of a piece. Yeah.
I have an idea. I like to blame everything on John Engler. Because in my memory, because that's easy, after my memory, it seems as if when he got into office, that was when the mental health budget was slashed.
He did that, yes.
In this area, the language in the community was Ipsy State. I think Center for Forensic Psychiatry, or that might be a separate place.
That still exists.
Okay.
Yeah,
But anyway, John Engler shut down the mental hospitals and mental institutions that we had, mental health centers that we had, slashed the budget, tried to go to more, getting consumers out into the community. I don't know, guys, that it might be better for them, but it was not providing treatment and putting the burden more on local municipalities, law enforcement.
Right.
Do I have it right? Do I get an A?
Yes, sure.
Can we blame Engler?
I mean, it's not his idea. It goes back. The federal government did that initially with the idea of, and I think it was Reagan that really completed the push.
But did we
The
ever have great?
idea-
Was there a time of good mental health care that was,
Well,
because that's what I'm going back to, and I'm sorry for cutting you off there,
better.
but
I
that's,
mean, so there were problems with the wide use of hospitalization and institutionalization of people who were struggling with mental illness. That's a huge problem.
Okay.
And so a lot of this happened under the guise of saying, wow, we're not doing a very good job with hospitalization, institutionalization. Let's close those down, get people out into the community. But it was entirely sold on the idea that there would be numerous readily accessible, well-funded mental health clinics on an outpatient basis. So the idea was, look, if we have good mental health care out there on an outpatient basis, we don't need so many inpatient beds available. True, except that when you close the hospitals, you close the institutions, and then you don't fund the community system that you've promised. Now you just have no mental health care.
no.
And that's the problem. And Engler completed that project in our state quite effectively.
And when you don't
that's
have,
what we're living with. Yeah.
and when you don't have that, you do have an increase in the jail population, right?
Right.
You do
Right.
have an increased burden on law enforcement to provide mental health services if they're,
Right.
or be in
That's
that
right.
position where they're looked at to be responsible for that, or in
Exactly.
mental health situations.
Right.
You
And
increase
the
the burden on
schools.
law enforcement.
We're also increasing the burden on schools. So when it comes to kids who are struggling, we're asking schools to do more and more and more that isn't central to their educational mission per se. It's really a social service mission. And again, that could be fine. Maybe that's a good thing to do. Maybe because schools are a way of, that's where kids go, that's a good place to do this, except you've got to fund and staff them adequately. Then you can't ask them to do everything and not give them the tools and the money to do it with. That's where we go wrong. So yes, so law enforcement, it's no secret that the corrections system across the country is the largest mental health provider in America. It is basically a gigantic set of mental health institutions. That's what they are, because the mental illness rates amongst prison and jail populations is through the roof.
I think I recall, the Cook County Jail hired a mental health professional to run it, if I'm right, a couple of years ago. Does that?
Yeah, I seem to recall that there is.
That's Chicago.
Yeah, and I know. I actually have a former classmate from my doctoral program that works in the federal prison system, like at the warden level, so actually running a facility, not just the mental health care at the facility.
Okay.
She's a mental health professional. So there is some of that. I'm not sure how much there is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because it was a couple of years ago, and I was wondering, have we seen some success stories, improvements, or, I mean,
That I couldn't say.
if they didn't increase the budget and a lot of
Right.
other things, their structure, how
Right.
much, what can you do?
Right.
But with mental health, and back to Washington County, I think something that there's a misunderstanding. Many people, when they talk about the millage dealing with mental health, they'll call it the mental health millage, and they forget that it was titled the public safety and mental health millage.
Right.
And so the public, because there's a lot of people that surprised me, like in the conversation, it was the mental health millage, and they took it and they gave it to them.
Right. No,
it was.
The law was written. And a version of it was on the ballot, and so.
Yeah, that was the
it's
language of the
actually-
public safety and mental.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think it was a good example of, in Washington County, of the electorate recognizing
Absolutely.
that is an issue and stepping up and voting to increase their taxes and to pay to address a need that.
Yes. And I think when the public believes that government is going to do good things with their dollars, they're willing to give more of their dollars to the government to do it with. There are some things that that government sort of has the structure and scope and ability to do. There are things that government can be very good at. We need to be willing to. Government needs to be doing those things, and we need to be willing to fund them. I'm not saying, hey, everybody, let's just throw all our money at all our problems. It's not like that. It's actually the smart use of resources as much as it is the amount of resources, I think.
You know, I talk about the circuit, that civic, nonprofit group, community group of events and activities that you see, a lot of the same people in overlap. At a lot of the meetings, though, and I'm always criticized a lot of wasted meetings, things like that. But when it's dealing with mental health and the mental health professionals, you see, I haven't been at a frivolous mental health meeting.
That's good. Yeah.
I haven't. I can't think when I went to a mental health event where I didn't learn something, and I didn't, or where I went and I had doubts about how serious the people were, how involved, how much they care about the issue. You know, they really, people are engaged in the community. They're dealing with these issues. And they get it.
I think we take it seriously in this county.
Given the public safety mental health millage when it did pass, and that influx of tax dollars, have you seen some? What's the state? I mean, to that lack of media we had before.
I'm not sure. I think it's still playing out how those dollars are going to be spent. I can't remember what it was, but even recently I saw, a brief article about a specific program that was going to get to be funded by those dollars. So I think that's still playing out, and I would not claim to know exactly what we're doing with all those dollars, but I know that there are local organizations and governmental units that are really thinking hard about that. That I know, but I don't know where it's all going at this point.
With one of the nonprofits I'm associated with, I went to the recipients' rights training for mental health. Yeah. And an aha moment, there was someone that spoke up there, and she said that she was a mental health consumer, and she said it was so frustrating when people have other chronic illnesses or a chronic illness, how people are so understanding in that it's a chronic illness, they're not going to be totally cured. But with people that are dealing with some mental health issues, there's this expectation that it's their fault for not being cured, or they should be past that too much.
Yeah, I think there's an enormous amount of stigma and
absolutely. Yeah. Or they'll say, "Oh, you've been in therapy for 10 years or something," and that aren't you cured yet, or something like that, and not knowing anything about the background. So that's one of the misconceptions, and
that's right.
That's out there. Then something I learned immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think when someone has a physical illness, and they have tough days, if it's a chronic condition or a condition that's like episodic in some way, people are understanding about that. Yet we expect people who are struggling with mental illness just to act as if they don't have mental illness because you're getting treatment, it should be fine. I don't see anything, right? So why are you acting up in this way? And I think that's a product of poor information and stigma. And
I hear a lot, and I think many people feel like that there's an issue with over-medication, particularly with children. Generally in mental health, but I'm lighting up because, hey, child advocate and child mental health, that's a huge question. I should start taking notes, so I have that. But it came out. I knew we were going to talk about that, the medication of children. And do you... that's a real broad general statement. Are kids over-medicated? Are mental health over? So without asking that, could you speak to that conception or idea?
So it's part of a sort of a more complicated set of issues, I think. So I think that it's very, very hard to get quality mental health care for kids. And so we struggle with issues of accurate diagnosis, adequate assessment that would lead to accurate diagnosis, and then proper treatment given whatever the diagnosis is. So for some things, medication could be an important part of treatment, but I think that there has been at times that we've tended to, say, medicate children too quickly, and with drugs that we're actually really not sure if that's okay for a child to take, especially longer term. And I think it's part of the struggle to provide good mental health care across the board, whether it's through medication, therapy, the assessment that leads to those things.
Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I right to be suspicious of Big Pharma and saying that they have a lot to do with that? And if an issue with or does Big Pharma, does it shape mental health, or does it have too much of an influence, or where am I in that? You know, what's Big Pharma's role, and are people right to be suspicious? And
I think certainly, we can't sit here in the midst of the opiate crisis and say that Big Pharma is across the board a trustworthy player in the system.
No, we can't.
Right? I mean, you have state after state right now suing Big Pharma and getting major settlements and some verdicts that say that actually Big Pharma has been operating in a way that's not okay. Its role in this specifically, I'm not sure I'm an expert in that. I'm pretty sure I'm not. What I do know is that there are problems in the ways that kids are diagnosed and treated, and that it's very, very hard to get them good care because there just aren't enough providers. So mental health assistance accessibility is a huge problem. It's hard for adults, and it's even worse when we look at kids because there are just fewer providers that see kids. So, I think we're really up against it on that front.
And these are decisions that are made in Lansing at the state level. Well, to the extent that we have state funding, there's federal funding for mental health
there's
also.
Federal funding.
But in terms of getting more dollars to local municipalities, as we were saying before, those are Lansing decisions that.
Those are Lansing decisions. That's what I think. And if that's not true, I would love for Lansing lawmakers to speak up and tell us how it is, because the perception is very much that that state dollars are not being allocated in an effective way for the people of this state and this county. Yeah.
And kind of just touch back on the education. So it's one big question that I wanted to ask education experts that came on here was kind of what I mentioned before about a county-wide education millage. But you're pointing me on a road towards more, state funding and how municipalities are funded. As that's really going to be where we're going to get an influx or get some real structural change in terms of the budget.
I think so.
And distribution.
Right. Yeah, I think it really is. I think it has to happen at the state level. That essentially, I really see the local millages as unfortunately necessary band-aids because of the death by 1,000 cuts that local units have experienced from the state. Yeah.
And we're having redistricting coming up, and I think a lot of those budget decisions came out of that gerrymandered system that we have. And when we have X amount, we have so many more Democrats than Republicans in Michigan, but the decisions don't come out that way. But with redistricting, we have an opportunity to address that.
Right. I'm pretty eager to see what state government will look like when the districts are drawn in a nonpartisan way.
Yes.
I really am. I think I'm hoping that we'll be looking at a very different situation in Lansing.
That also brings to mind, and I want to go back to mental health, but the census coming up, and as getting an accurate count, so many of the areas where there's disparities, lack of opportunity, traditionally are undercounted.
Right.
And
yes, it's a problem.
Where the most need is at, the limited need that is going to come, the limited resources that are going to go to that area,
Right.
It's based on faulty numbers. So we really have to get to our accurate
Exactly.
census, our best.
And the projection is that Michigan will lose congressional seats
Yeah.
again. So, yeah, we'll have that much less say in the federal government. Yeah, yeah.
Gorham, I'm going to come back to child mental health because I think, I'm 50. The child growing up today is so much different, in a so much different world than I was, and has so many really different challenges, different culture. What do you think parents can do, adults right now, for just mental health? What are people missing? Some basic things, tips. I want to kind of uplift the.
Right, yeah. Let's find some hope. Let's get. We are.
So.
No, I think there are actually a lot of good things going on too, and a lot of good things that people can do. I think that just simple things like really talking with your kids a lot, spending time, and that's hard. That sounds so simple. But it's actually hard to do because people are so stretched. Everybody's very busy. People are maybe working multiple jobs trying to make ends meet. It's very difficult to spend time with your kids. But that is the primary relationship that kids experience is with their parents. And so spending time together, really listening to them in early childhood, reading with them, being involved in the child's school so that you know kind of what's happening. And those things are all positive. I think accessing things like after-school programs and early childhood, good early childhood education, all those things. If you can find it, I think it's good to do those things.
Excuse me. I mentioned earlier that I was part of a community health. The Washington County Health Department has a community health team, and everyone, I can't give you that, it's like 7 or 8 of us now. Excuse me, it's rotated a bit. But we all represent areas of the county that have been deemed lacking in opportunity, health, jobs, education, or all three. And in it, over the last 3 years, it's interesting how much just relationships come up.
Yes.
And the relationships in the sense it seems like one of the best indicators for positive mental health, resistance builders, is for a child to have at least one trusted adult in
That's right.
that non-judgmental relationship in their life. It seems like with adults and with substance use disorder and returning citizens, just having strong relationships with other people that care about them. And getting in those spaces. Those are, it not only does it sound and feel right, but statistically the data
holds up.
shows that, right?
Right.
So.
Well, we are relational, right? We're relational creatures, we people are. I think we thrive in relationship, and that's right. It really helps if a child has some adult that they can look to where they feel they really trust that adult, they feel they can go to that adult with things, they feel that they're loved by that adult, held in high regard by that adult. Those things are all really, really helpful. It gives the child a rock, right? For a relational rock. So that, because since we are relational, right, we're going to look for that sense somewhere. And it really helps if we can get it somewhere healthy so that we're not looking in unhealthy places to get that sense of being regarded, loved, needed, all those things.
And I'm going to stay away from politics, but kind of try it as best I can. I don't go into the prosecutor's race, but my involvement in it and what I've been learning about it in the criminal justice system, understanding just what little representation defendants have, and understanding how mental health consumers are impacted by the criminal justice system. because you have the psychology background and the law degree.
And the law degree, yeah.
Can give, I'm about to say nonpartisan, just an objective, what's the state of children in the criminal justice system, mental health consumers in the criminal justice system?
Okay, so, I do child-related cases all the time. I do mostly child protection cases. I've also done juvenile delinquency cases. And then we also have sort of the criminal justice side that you're referring to as well. And so there was it's well known and well documented that for defendants that can't afford counsel in a criminal case, the court-appointed system, if you look across the state, is really problematic. It's got a lot of deficiencies, and it's not really meeting the constitutionally required level of effective counsel.
This is not for children.
I'm really thinking about the first criminal defendants.
Okay.
Because that's where there's a whole huge report, and there was there have been a commission, and they're looking at what do we need to do about this to improve representation for people who can't afford to hire their own counsel.
Right.
Okay. So what's I think less known is that on the child law side, on the juvenile law side, in child protection cases, the child gets a lawyer and the parents can get a lawyer at public expense. It's the same kind of system. That is, if you can't afford counsel, you can get counsel appointed for you.
Right.
And it's got the same problems in our state. And this is not a condemnation of any given legal practitioner who's doing this work.
Right.
I'm talking about structural issues. I think that there are a lot of good lawyers who are struggling mightily to do a good job in the face of, again, not being given what they need in order to do that job. So on the child protection side, people get lawyers, and we've got problems in that representation that are very, very similar to the problems with defense for indigent criminal defendants. Okay.
A number that I've been saying, and tell me if this fits, and I spoke with the public defender, and I come out of that abolishment movement, very left wing and such, but I said saying that and recognizing some people are going to need to be separated from society because they're a danger, they're a threat. And given that, I asked the public defender how many of her cases did she have. Give me a number, an idea. She said she had 800 cases the previous year, and about 6 of those needed to be incarcerated, in her opinion. But that 800 new cases just blew my mind, because knowing the life cycle of a case, you could literally be defending thousands of people. So indigent defendants, there's no way.
Are way too high.
It's ridiculous to even think that they have some type of vigorous defense. And it's not a knock on the public defenders, because they put it in an impossible task when you have.
No, absolutely right. This is not. I work with a bunch of public defenders, and I work with private attorneys who take public defense cases as well, because it works that way as well. It's not just the county public defender office doing that work. I have nothing but high respect for them. I'm really talking about structural issues, and you mentioned the prosecutor's race, and without getting into the details of that, but at the most recent debate in that race, it was discussed the fact that so many cases are resolved through a plea bargain.
Over 95%.
It seems awfully suspicious. Really, that number of people shouldn't go to trial on their cases? Really? At least 2 of the candidates spoke to this and said that's really far too high a number, and it comes about through overcharging. And one of them said, so for example, if you're facing 10 counts, you might go, well, you know what? They're gonna convict me of one of those. Even if I haven't actually, it's just the odds are I'm gonna get convicted. I don't want to spend that kind of time in prison. I'm gonna take a plea, right? So if you put that together with a public defense system that is starved of resources, then on then the defendant, as they're facing this decision, isn't getting potentially adequate counsel to make that decision as well. So it really is both sides. It's how cases are being prosecuted, and that was the focus at the debate, but it's also how do we provide defense for defendants in criminal proceedings. And it's, I mean, again, there's a huge report out there on indigent defense in Michigan, and it is not pretty.
And the racial disparities are just
astonishing.
Are ridiculous.
Right. And that brings me back into the juvenile law side. So defendants in juvenile delinquency cases, the kids who are accused of having committed crimes, are facing many of the same problems that the adult criminal defendants are facing. And it's an absolutely huge problem. And in our county, we have astonishing racial disparity in juvenile delinquency cases. And you can't look at the numbers there. When you have when the percentage of youth who are involved in the delinquency system, who are youth of color, is about 7 times their proportion in the population, rough numbers, you've got a problem there. Something is wrong. And we really need to be paying attention to that at every level: policing, prosecutorial decisions, court decisions. All of those things need to be coming into play, and also how do we provide defense? And then also, how do we conceptualize the goals of those cases? So in juvenile delinquency, the goal is explicitly rehabilitation, much more than punishment. The philosophy is rehabilitation. Let's give some help here. And so, but we need to be actually providing resources in a way that's consistent with that goal. It's the right goal, but I think we're going about things in perhaps an overly punitive and under-resourced way.
I know that I read stories about the jail being overcrowded, specifically juvenile detention. Is that at capacity at all? Is that an issue?
Right this moment, I think it fluctuates. But I'm sure the sheriff's department runs the facilities, and runs the jail. The Department of Health and Human Services is involved in juvenile justice. I'm sure they could comment on it. I don't know where it stands right now or how chronically it's at capacity exactly, but I think it's more crowded than we would like it to be on a regular basis.
We started off, and you said in your introduction, the U of M, or you had experience with U of M Law Clinic, or
that's what I teach in. That's right.
From growing up here and being in the community, it always seemed like you'd hear about pro bono attorneys, but it was always so difficult to find out. Well, where, how? So, what are the or what are the types of clients that you guys serve? How do you find them, or how do they find you?
That is a great question. So we have 17 different clinics at the University of Michigan Law School at this point, doing a wide variety of legal work. Some of them are doing community development work, helping businesses get started and that kind of thing, helping entrepreneurs get going. Others are litigation clinics, and I'm in that side of things. But basically in my clinics, we get largely court-appointed work. So the Washtenaw County Juvenile Court appoints us as lawyers. So I'm doing child protection cases. And we're often appointed to be lawyers for kids, sometimes lawyers for parents. And we do kind of a variety of other cases where people just get referred to us. We're not getting directly appointed, but once they're referred, we'll do an intake, determine whether they qualify for our services, and have a case that has merit, and then we'll provide free representation for them. So a lot of my work is court appointed. So just like public defenders in that sense, right?
Yeah. Are you you guys are doing as much as you can? Are you at capacity, or do you tell people?
Yeah, we're often at. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump your question. We're often at capacity,
Okay.
but not always. It tends to be worth getting in touch and seeing where we are with things. So sometimes we'll run a wait list. We also have so we have this community service mission, right? We want to provide free legal counsel for members of our community. We also have an educational mission. So one of the things we look at is kind of what's our mix of cases to make sure that our students are getting the experiences they need in order to become good attorneys. So we have to think about that as well. So it may be that we'll have some space in the clinic, but we know it needs to be for a certain sort of case rather than a different sort of case so that the students can get a well-rounded experience. So we have dual missions. But always we provide quality legal counsel on a pro bono basis. That's our job.
And people we can go to the website, give you guys a call.
Yes. If you go to law.umich.edu, that's the law school's website. And if you look on the left side of the page, I had to think about it for a minute. Left side of the page, there should be a link for clinics, and you can go in there and you can see what our clinics are and what they're all about, and ways of getting in touch with them and so on.
All right.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left. There was a question with, yes. And it was a serious one. Working in protective services and the different cases that you see, do you see some commonality or is it all over the map? I'm thinking, is there just something out there that maybe some common thread that if more parents were aware of, or people, or was more understood, you might recognize some things, could address it earlier, or I have no idea.
Right. I mean, one of the things we need to get a handle on is the substance abuse crisis.
Okay.
So substance abuse is involved in almost all of my cases. It's not necessarily the only thing involved. I'm not necessarily saying that, but sometimes it is the biggest thing involved. And another big area is mental health, and often these are co-occurring in cases, right? So really, we need to help people get a handle on those issues, and that's going to be a major step in preventing child maltreatment in the county, because then parents will be in a better position to give their kids what they need. And you need to understand that most cases involve neglect, not abuse, right? Abuse is a minority of cases. It's actually neglect, so failing to meet the physical, medical, educational needs of the kids to a level that falls below kind of basic standards. That's what becomes something that Children's Protective Services can act on. And we really need to make sure that parents, that if we could help parents get in a good position to be able to do that, the parents generally want to. There are very few parents that are waking up each morning, even involved in these cases, like, I think I'll be a bad parent today.
Yeah.
They're not. They want to be good parents. It's important that we help them do that. And
I think to close out, and I'll let you have the last word, but we only had an hour, but one of the larger issues, and maybe another time you can come back, housing, and how housing relates to what you just said. If you can't, if you don't have stable housing or can't afford stable housing, it's going to be that much more difficult to get a handle or have an opportunity to get on a substance use disorder. To stabilize your a mental health condition.
Exactly.
I mean, if you don't have stability, if your housing is transitioning.
That's right. That is a huge stressor for families facing that situation, and that doesn't just include homelessness. It includes housing instability. So there are even more than there are people who are homeless, which there are too many of. There are people who kind of bounce between homelessness and being housed, and it's just very tenuous. And that has a huge impact on their ability to really get their kids what they need. Absolutely.
And if you're fortunate enough not to be dealing with a mental health illness, just trying to address that it's an incredible stressor. Just maintaining with the amount of personal time you're going to have when you have to work so much to maintain some type of housing.
Right.
It's a
exactly
time.
right.
It's time.
Yep, it's a real trigger for people. It's a real stressor that makes symptoms. So if you're dealing with mental illness, that makes symptoms worse. If you're struggling with substance abuse, that gives you those stresses are triggers to use. So it really is. It is a major factor in a lot of cases.
So when you read about housing and Ypsilanti being Ann Arbor's housing solution, that's the impact of that. You know, all of those things that we talked about are impacted by housing. People need a place to live.
People need a place to live. That is well said. That is well said.
Thank you, Joshua, so much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
I hope you come back
good
again.
to talk with you. I'd be happy to. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. I'll see you next time.